observed that he never spoke of his wife, and yet Mrs. Carbuncle was almost sure that she had heard of such a lady. He had made himself very agreeable, and was, either by art or nature, a courteous man, one who paid compliments to ladies. It was true, however, that he sometimes startled his hearers by things which might have been considered to border on coarseness if they had not been said by a clergyman. Lizzie had an idea that he intended to marry Miss Macnulty, and Miss Macnulty certainly received his attentions with pleasure. In these circumstances his prolonged stay at the castle was not questioned. But when, towards the end of November, Lord George and Sir Griffin took their departure, he was obliged to return to his flock. On the great subject of the diamonds Lizzie had spoken her mind freely to Mrs. Carbuncle early in the days of their friendship, immediately, that is, after the bargainings had been completed. £10,000! ejaculated Mrs. Carbuncle, opening wide her eyes. Lizzie nodded her head thrice, in token of reiterated assurance. "Do you mean that you really know their value?" The ladies at this time were closeted together, and were discussing many things in the closest confidence. "They were valued for me by jewellers." £10,000! And Sir Florian gave them to you? "Put them round my neck, and told me they were to be mine, always." "Generous man!" "Ah, if you had but known him!" said Lizzie, just touching her eye with her handkerchief. "I dare say. And now the people claim them. I'm not a bit surprised at that, my dear. I should have thought a man couldn't give away so much as that, not just as one makes a present that costs £40 or £50. Mrs. Carbuncle could not resist the opportunity of showing that she did not think so very much of that coming £35 gift for which the bargain had been made. "That's what they say, and they say ever so many other things besides. They mean to prove that it's an heirloom." "Perhaps it is." "But it isn't. My cousin Frank, who knows more about law than any other man in London, says that they can't make a necklace an heirloom. If it was a brooch or a ring it would be different. I don't quite understand it, but it is so." "It's a pity Sir Florian didn't say something about it in his will," suggested Mrs. Carbuncle. "But he did. At least, not just about the necklace." Then Lady Eustace explained the nature of her late husband's will, as far as it regarded chattels to be found in the castle of Portray at the time of his death, and added the fiction, which had now become common to her, as to the necklace having been given to her in Scotland. "I shouldn't let them have it," said Mrs. Carbuncle. "I don't mean," said Lizzie. "I should sell them," said Mrs. Carbuncle. "But why?" "Because there are so many accidents. A woman should be very rich indeed before she allows herself to walk about with £10,000 upon her shoulders. Suppose somebody broke into the house and stole them; and if they were sold, my dear, so that some got to Paris, and others to St. Petersburg, and others to New York, they'd have to give it up then." Before the discussion was over, Lizzie tripped upstairs and brought the necklace down, and put it on Mrs. Carbuncle's neck. "I shouldn't like to have such property in my house, my dear," continued Mrs. Carbuncle. "Of course diamonds are very nice. Nothing is so nice. And if a person had a proper place to keep them, and all that." "I've a very strong iron case," said Lizzie. "But they should be at the bank, or at the jeweller's, or somewhere quite safe. People might steal the case and all. If I were you, I should sell them." It was explained to Mrs. Carbuncle on that occasion that Lizzie had brought them down with her in the train from London, and that she intended to take them back in the same way. "There's nothing the thieves would find easier than to steal them on the way," said Mrs. Carbuncle. It was some days after this that there came down to her by post some terribly frightful documents, which were the first results, as far as she was concerned, of the filing of a bill in Chancery; which hostile proceeding was, in truth, effected by the unaided energy of Mr. Camperdown, although Mr. Camperdown put himself forward simply as an instrument used by the trustees of the Eustace property, Within 8 days she was to enter an appearance, or go through some preliminary ceremony towards showing why she should not surrender her diamonds to the Lord Chancellor, or to one of those satraps of his, the Vice Chancellors, or to some other terrible myrmidon. Mr. Camperdown, in his letter, explained that the service of this document upon her in Scotland would amount to nothing, even were he to send it down by a messenger; but that, no doubt, she would send it to her attorney, who would see the expedience of avoiding exposure by accepting the service. Of all which explanation Lizzie did not understand one word. Messrs. Camperdown's letter, and the document which it contained, did frighten her considerably, although the matter had been discussed so often that she had accustomed herself to declare that no such bugbears as that should have any influence on her. She had asked Frank whether, in the event of such missiles reaching her, she might send them to him. He had told her that they should be at once placed in the hands of her attorney, and consequently she now sent them to Messrs. Mowbray and Mopus, with a very short note from herself. Lady Eustace presents her compliments to Messrs. Mowbray and Mopus, and encloses some papers she has received about her diamonds. They are her own diamonds, given to her by her late husband. Please do what is proper, but Mr. Camperdown ought to be made to pay all the expenses. She had, no doubt, allowed herself to hope that no further steps would be taken in the matter, and the very name of the Vice Chancellor did for a few hours chill the blood at her heart. In those few hours she almost longed to throw the necklace into the sea, feeling sure that, if the diamonds were absolutely lost, there must be altogether an end of the matter. But, by degrees, her courage returned to her, as she remembered that her cousin had told her that, as far as he could see, the necklace was legally her own. Her cousin had, of course, been deceived by the lies which she had repeated to him, but lies which had been efficacious with him might be efficacious with others. Who could prove that Sir Florian had not taken the diamonds to Scotland, and given them to her there, in that very house which was now her own? She told Mrs. Carbuncle of the missiles which had been hurled at her from the London courts of law, and Mrs. Carbuncle evidently thought that the diamonds were as good as gone. "Then I suppose you can't sell them?" said she. "Yes, I could. I could sell them to morrow. What is to hinder me? Suppose I took them to jewellers in Paris?" "The jewellers would think you had stolen them." "I didn't steal them," said Lizzie. "They're my very own. Frank says that nobody can take them away from me. Why shouldn't a man give his wife a diamond necklace as well as a diamond ring? That's what I can't understand. What may he give her so that men shan't come and worry her life out of her in this way? As for an heirloom, anybody who knows anything knows that it can't be an heirloom. A pot or a pan may be an heirloom, but a diamond necklace cannot be an heirloom. Everybody knows that knows anything." "I dare say it will all come right," said Mrs. Carbuncle, who did not in the least believe Lizzie's law about the pot and pan. In the first week in January Lord George and Sir Griffin returned to the castle with the view of travelling up to London with the three ladies. This arrangement was partly thrown over by circumstances, as Sir Griffin was pleased to leave Portray 2 days before the others and to travel by himself. There was a bitter quarrel between Lucinda and her lover, and it was understood afterwards by Lady Eustace that Sir Griffin had had a few words with Lord George; but what those few words were she never quite knew. There was no open rupture between the two gentlemen, but Sir Griffin showed his displeasure to the ladies, who were more likely to bear patiently his ill humour in the present circumstances than was Lord George. When a man has shown himself to be so far amenable to feminine authority as to have put himself in the way of matrimony, ladies will bear a great deal from him. There was nothing which Mrs. Carbuncle would not endure from Sir Griffin, just at present; and on behalf of Mrs. Carbuncle, even Lizzie was long suffering. It cannot, however, be said that this Petruchio had as yet tamed his own peculiar shrew. Lucinda was as savage as ever, and would snap and snarl and almost bite. Sir Griffin would snarl too, and say very bearish things; but when it came to the point of actual quarrelling, he would become sullen, and in his sullenness would yield. "I don't see why Carruthers should have it all his own way," he said one hunting morning to Lucinda. "I don't care twopence who have their way," said Lucinda. "I mean to have mine. That's all." "I'm not speaking about you. I call it downright interference on his part, and I do think you give way to him. You never do anything that I suggest." "You never suggest anything that I like to do.